In the summer of 1974, Canadian cadets came to the Valcartier base north of Quebec City for military training. Aged 13 to 18, they were considered the best and brightest of their units. Most of them were thrilled to be there. Michel Junot Katsuya of Longueuil, Quebec, had just turned 14.
Well, of course, it was the first time I was away for so long from my family. It was basically the dream of living the life of a young soldiers at 14 at that time. We got to fire guns, we had to use military equipment, we had to be carried around in military vehicles. We were going around in uniforms, we were being yelled at. It was almost better than Walt Disney World.
18-year-old Jerry Fostati of Montreal had just been promoted to platoon sergeant. It was his third summer at Valcartier, in charge of younger cadets.
They were there on a leadership course. One of the things they did was build a bridge, a modular bridge, and they built it across the lake. And they had to work together and work well.
At the bridge building was 15-year-old Peter Van Kampen, now of Sarnia, Ontario.
What they would do is send us for a week out in the bush, learn survival with nothing. No, they didn't give us food for the week. You were on your own. You had to find your own food, which we did.
On July 30th, 1974, it was raining. The boys were called in for lunch and then an improvised explosive safety class. Charles Gutta was the regular Army Sergeant Major in charge.
So they pushed, all the beds were pushed back, and they were sitting down in semicircle, legs crossed, asked to get this lecture. Captain Giroux was the instructor at the time. He started talking and telling them munitions that are blue are safe, there is no problem. You could, and he passed it around.
And I recall to my right somebody saying, "Sir, this is a green grenade, what do you want us to do with it?" He says, "Oh, it's a dummy." So I just went around the room.
There were numerous times when someone said, "Is it okay to pull the pin?" And they were holding the green grenade. And he said, "Yes, it's fine." There was one point they said, "Is this live?" And he said, "No, I don't want to die here." Of course it's not live. So the pin was pulled numerous times and put back in.
Even after the pin is pulled, the grenade doesn't explode unless the striker handle is released. The last boy to touch the green grenade was 14-year-old Eric Lloyd.
Eric Lloyd was sitting actually in front of me. And I have my legs, I have long legs, so I had them stretched because, it was tight confinement. And he was punching me in the legs before he grabbed the grenade.
Eric Lloyd pulled the pin and let the striker handle fly off, then raised the grenade to take a close-up look.
What I remember is there was smoke ringing in my ears from the bang. Yeah, and then I couldn't see anything, and then the screaming around us.
And when I opened my eyes, it was just white smoke. And in a 14 years old imagination, I suddenly had the thoughts, and I remember clearly, I said, "Oh, I'm dead. Oh, just too bad, my parents will be sad about it."
I turned around, ran out, and I fell. My right leg gave. Then I found out that I had two big gaping holes in my leg.
And I look at myself and I see myself covered with flesh, piece of hair, piece of bones, blood, and I see myself full of blood as well, but I'm not really sure if it's mine or somebody else.
There were 138 people in a very small room. They were lying on top of each other. There was blood everywhere, pools of it, and there was blood on the walls. There was a big hole in the floor, and there were dying people. And we got them out.
Well, the first one, when I did the triage, the first one that I looked at, he had blood coming out of his upper left side. Blood was just pumping out. Two of them were dead on the spot. One was sitting down, cross-legged. Everything that he had here, up to his head, up to there, was all gone, other than a part of his chin. And then later on in the evening, I did confirm that it was Eric Lloyd.
They brought me to the hospital. The next thing I know, I'm put in a basement somewhere. I was in the hall and they kept opening his door, and then I found out later that was the morgue. So I could see everything in the morgue.
What could you see?
I could see white sheets on top of bodies and people going like Jerry in and out. Then they had to go in and identify the bodies.
The one that they wanted me to identify was at the far end of the room. And I had to walk through this quite deep pool of blood to get to him. And they pulled down the sheet. His chest had been blown open and his face was covered in small cuts. I remember leaving the morgue, walking away from the room and turning back and looking and thinking, my God, that somebody should do something. There are bloody boot prints coming out of the morgue. And then I realized that I was the one that made the boot prints.
Another killed instantly by the grenade was 15-year-old Mario Provencher of Longueuil, Quebec. Mario's older brother, Normand, was an 18-year-old in the Army Reserve at the time and was in Valcartier as well. He remembers being ordered to come to the morgue and identify his brother's body. He didn't want to do it.
I didn't have choice, sir. I didn't have choice. I know what the grenades does. I know. It looked like he was sleeping. I couldn't imagine my brother. I don't have anymore my brother. I couldn't. I said, well, no, I couldn't. It's a dream or something, I was loving so much. They took me, my brothers away. I know he was a priest there. He told me, Normand, the God wants that. I couldn't believe
It's God's will.
Yeah, it's God's will. How can, the kids, they never get anywhere. The God's will is what they all don't see.
Peter Van Kampen was forgotten in the basement of the hospital for 6 hours, then finally saw a doctor at 8 p.m.
And once I got in, they looked at it and goes, oh, you need stitches in there. They didn't clean the wound. They just said, we're going to stitch you up. But first what we're going to do is, here's a piece of wood, bite on this, because this is going to hurt, because we have no anesthetic left to freeze your legs.
In the confusion, the military sent a telegram to Peter's parents, advising them that he was dead.
And then a day later, 2 days after the accident, they got another one or so that says that I was alive and I had lacerations in my leg. That's all they knew.
In the days that followed, there were funerals for the 6 cadets who died. The Canadian military bargained with the families of the victims over the cost, even the price of the coffin.
The military, I had a major with me, says, no, this is too much. Too much. I chose another one, that was not okay. Anyway, I told him, I want my brothers to be in uniform, cadets uniform, at the funeral. They never want, they refuse that. They refuse that. The uniform, the complete uniform costs about $150, let's see. My mom wants that too.
They didn't
never
want him buried in his uniform.
No.
In these confidential Defense Department documents, the military lists the actual funeral costs, the amount they would pay, and the difference which the dead cadets' families would have to pay.
I think this is indecent. Indecent that you've got to sort of negotiate with your government when you serve your government. We were just cadet, but we were serving you. We were there for you.
A few days after the funerals, the surviving cadets were brought one at a time to a nuclear fallout shelter at the Valcartier base. It is called the Diefenbunker and has offices that would be occupied by senior government officials in the event of nuclear war. Here, a panel of officers began to interrogate the cadets, part of the official military inquiry.
They got me into a room with all these officers. And each one of them is all yelling questions at me, and not one at a time. They're all at once. I could hardly understand them at the time. And
What kind of questions?
Questions is, why did you bring a grenade in? I said, I didn't bring a grenade in. I came in with the captain and as a corporal. They brought him in the box. No, you guys were at fault. You must have picked it up at the gun range. Everyone went next door and picked up a grenade. No, we didn't do that. But no matter what we said or did, they wouldn't listen. And they just kept blaming us the whole time, getting mad at us,
In the interrogations, each cadet was sworn to secrecy about what happened.
Well, it was clearly said simply that remember that you are in the army and you are not allowed to speak about this incident to anybody, including your parents.
They just didn't want us to tell anyone anything. So when we all left, we've all kept our mouth shut for 30 or more years.
The cadets finally broke their silence. When we come back, their battle for justice 4 decades later. For decades after the accident, many of the cadets honored the vow of silence imposed on them by the Government of Canada. Many of them suffered post-traumatic stress, yet were denied medical treatment or any form of compensation. A few years ago, they decided to have a reunion and came together for the first time in the fight for recognition and redress. The charge against the Defense Department was led by the cadets' former Sergeant Major, Charles Gutta. When he retired after a long career in the forces, he discovered that the boys were mistreated by the military after the accident and that their health concerns have been neglected ever since. Gutta was told that cadets did not merit the same treatment as regular soldiers.
My reaction is that if I have a child and you sign a waiver that I'm allowing my Stefan Gutta to go to cadet camp, you're taking responsibility of my child and you are responsible for his care and welfare. But when something happens, they forget that they're responsible for them. At least in my book, that's what they did.
That's what it looks like to you.
They forgot them completely.
Many cadets felt no one was ever held accountable for the incident. The munitions officer in charge that day, Captain Giroux, was held criminally responsible by a Quebec coroner, but then found innocent at a civilian trial.
They cover up Captain Giroux there. That's make me mad. That's mad, you cannot believe. And even today, I know they hide something. They hide a lot of things.
Finally, on the 35th anniversary of the incident, the Defense Department agreed to hold a special memorial service at the Valcartier base. Many of the survivors got along quite well in the decades after the event, but some were physically and emotionally devastated. Most had symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
We all had the same symptoms, so like not sleeping very well at night, the ringing in our ears still, and just certain paranoia. Like today, I can't even go to a fireworks show, like, for July 1st fireworks, because there's certain, ones that go off and it sounds like a grenade.
The Government of Canada was remarkably insensitive to the cadets' plight. In 2011, one survivor requested that the military pay for a PTSD evaluation recommended by his own doctor. He received this short answer from the Justice Department saying that his request came too late. It is our position that the limitation period began to run on the date of your 18th birthday and expired 3 years later.
Shane, the bureaucracy treats us like just a piece of assets, just a piece of furniture. Yeah, we were cadets, but we were under their responsibility. They had responsibility towards us.
It's a cross with roses.
Shortly after his brother's funeral, Normand Provencher went out and got this memorial tattoo, showing his brother's grave being watched over by Jesus. He went on to have a long career in the armed forces, but struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder his whole life.
You know, I was dreaming all the time the same thing. Dreaming all the time the same thing. The goddamn morgue there.
In your dream, you're walking into the morgue?
Yeah. Yeah, and they pull the curtain there. Every day, every morning, I was crying, sad and everything. I said, hold down. No, I'm not gonna live like that. So I tried to, I started taking drugs. You know, small drugs and everything. Years after years. Took a lot of cocaine, some cracks for 3 years.
You were smoking crack
to
kill the pain.
Yeah, yeah.
Our story has to be known. It's an atrocity. It's a travesty of justice that happened to us. There's some of them that are still on drugs, and they're trying to get help. They're trying to get medical help, and they can't get it.
They addressed their mind to that in November of '74, but they didn't do anything.
3 years ago, the NDP defense critic Jack Harris began championing the case of the surviving cadets. He thinks their PTSD was made worse by enforced secrecy at a young age.
They essentially left them in the traumatic state they were in and compounded it by creating a veil of secrecy around it, telling them that they weren't allowed to talk about it, in some cases making them feel that it was their fault. And then they didn't deal with the legal redress that they would have been entitled to as well. They seemed to be willing to try and avoid that.
In the interrogations, it turns out that each child was asked if his parents were likely to sue the government. This classified document shows that only 3 of the 62 injured cadets interrogated by the board declared that their parents may eventually submit a claim against the Crown.
I think from day one it was an effort to limit the compensation that might have to be paid, but I mean this is the government of Canada. They're supposed to, they're the deepest pockets in the sense that can accept liability and responsibility if something happens like this, and the facts are so clear as to what happened. The coroner's report spells it out, exactly how it happened and why it happened, and it was clear negligence on behalf of the system.
Canadian cadets no longer handle explosives, even dummy ones. Now that the military ombudsman is investigating the Valcartier accident, today's military is finally admitting that the case was not well handled. Rear Admiral Jennifer Bennett is in charge of the military reserves and cadet programs.
To some extent, we have to look back at 1974. Things were very different. We weren't aware of post-traumatic stress disorder until into the 80s. And I don't think that we considered the consequences immediately.
But it certainly looks like negligence by the Department of Defense.
Yes, there was negligence. I think we had a duty of care to those cadets, as well as the instructors and their families. And we'll find through the report that the Ombudsman's done, they'll bring together the factors and present to us, could we have done things better? What should we do now to make up for that?
For years, the victims' families even had to fight to obtain proper military tombstones to mark the graves, and for this modest memorial stone at the Valcartier base. Those families and the surviving cadets are hoping that the injustice they have endured for decades will finally be set right with the Military Ombudsman's report. Terence McKenna, CBC News, Chambly, Quebec.